happy Monday, everyone. I hope that music got you all excited and ready to go, and you're feeling energetic, whether it's your Monday morning, afternoon, or evening. This is our last day with all of you. Really excited to be here again with a full session planned before we say goodbye. Steve, if you're able today too, we'd love to do an extra few minutes, 10 to 15 minutes at the end of today's session to catch any other questions you have. Really looking forward to interactivity today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Steve.
Hi, you guys. Welcome back for our final session. A little boo-hoo, but it's going to be awesome and fun. So, mostly happy. So, what I want to do today is start with reviewing where we have been. So, in the first session, we talked about what I call telling, which means what's your story, getting your story together. And I did that by giving you these four beats: character, conditions, conflict, and change. And those don't change. I expect to hear those in our exercise today. Those are the foundation of what we are doing. And so I just want to remind you how important those things are, and then talk about two words: crystal explosion. Well, what is that? Well, this is very practical because what I want to do today is show you, because none of this means anything if you can't apply it, if it's not practical, if it doesn't impact your work. And so I'm just going to give you two examples of how I use this. And so it's not just, theoretical pie in the sky. This is real world concrete stuff we're dealing with. So at Universal Studios Japan, where I was for 4 years, I had a studio of designers. And I was there for 4 years. And during that 4 years, it was the 15th anniversary of Universal Studios Japan. And so I had an art director, and her job was she had to put decorations on the front gate of the park. And those decorations had to celebrate the 15th anniversary of Universal Studios Japan. So she came to me, she said, Steve, what do I design? What is like 15th anniversary? What does that mean? What do I say? How do I communicate that to the guests? So we already knew the hero of the story is the guest. Okay, we already knew the setting was this front gate, but what's the conflict? It's a gate. It's you just going into the park. And what's the change? I said to her, Yui, I said, 15th anniversary. I don't know about in Japan, but in the United States, the 15th anniversary is the crystal anniversary. Crystal is awesome because there are crystal colors, jewel tones, all these design elements can come from this idea of crystal. Well, what about change? Well, it's an anniversary celebration. We want people to come here and see new things. We have new experiences. So I gave her the expression crystal explosion. I said, Yui, design a crystal explosion. And she said, what is a crystal explosion? I said, that's for you to figure out. And so this is the gate she designed. And look at that. It's beautiful. It's a crystal explosion, beautiful jewel tones. It fit in with the marketing message, which their word was reborn, which means to reinvigorate, to reinvent yourself. And so it all tied together. And they ended up using this design of these crystals exploding on all their merchandise, on their food cups, and everything. And it all just came from this very basic idea of the story and the change and the conflict and those two words. I just said crystal explosion. And she said, that was the best direction I ever got. I said, I just gave you two words. You came up with the rest. She said, yeah, but it gave me a foundation on which to build. Here's another example. So these are the portals from Epic Universe, the current project that I'm working on, the park that opens again, May 22nd of next year. And so the team had designed marquees because when you go to a theme park, there's always marquees for each land: Tomorrowland, Frontierland, Star Wars Land, you know, whatever it is, there's going to be a marquee. So they came to me to show me the marquee designs. And I said, well, wait a minute. Our story is that these portals just opened up. They opened up from the center of the park and you could go anywhere. Why would there be a marquee? Why, when this magical portal opens up, would you have a big sign in front of it that's permanent that tells you where to go? I said, no, there's no marquees. And so every theme park in the world has marquees for their lands, except for this one, because that wasn't our story. So when I say these things about story, I'm just not making them up. I mean, they have real foundation in how we design places, how that's executed, how those four C's translated into real world design. So that's what I want you to think about today, is how this really impacts the real world stuff. So beyond just the meeting and the pitch, you got to carry this through. That's why today's session is called gelling, because first we did telling and then we did selling, which is the pitching of it. And this is not a class in pitching. Remember, you go to Carmine Gallo for that. But I just want you to know, in pitches, I think fewer words, more pictures, know your audience, and what does that audience need emotionally. Those are just really key things to your pitch when you show it, especially if you're doing design. You want to show things, not describe them with words. You want to know what your audience want. Are you talking to the user? Are you talking to the person who's financing it? Who is your audience? And then what does that audience need emotionally? So for the Crystal Explosion, they wanted excitement. They wanted change. They wanted something new. So explosion. And for that second audience, the theme park guest who comes to Epic Universe, they want this mystery, this idea of these portals opening up. They don't want a big sign that says this way, go to this land, because that's not the mystery of it. And that's not how it unravels. So that's how that works. And so that's why today is called gelling. How does this all come together? So now you know what your idea is, you know what your story is, you can sell it, you can convince other people, you can tell the team, you can design it, but how does it all come together? And how ultimately does the guest or the user or the customer, the end user, how do they ingest all this? How do they experience it? What does it mean to them? And so that's the key question for today. What does it mean to everybody else? You know what it means to you now, but what does it mean to everybody else? Because I always say the guest doesn't come to the meetings. They don't know your brilliant ideas and all the things that you've been talking about and discussing in your foundation of your design and everything. It has to mean something to that person who just walks up and buys a ticket and goes in, the person that lives in the community, the person that walks by. So what does it mean to that person? How do these ideas actually translate to that person? And so if you look at neuroscience, and there's all kinds of, studies about right brain, left brain, emotion versus facts. How do people make decisions? And a lot of the neuroscience, and I'm sure it's not all settled, but a lot of the neuroscience, when you read it, says that people really make decisions based on emotion. And they use the facts to justify that decision. So they want to buy this house that's too expensive, but they love the house. So they decide to buy the house. And then they use the facts. Well, it's closer to the school. Oh, look at there's shopping nearby. Oh, look, we can get this kind of loan, blah, blah, blah. Whatever it is. People will tend to lead with their emotions and the facts will follow. So if we put the facts up front, we're ignoring what some of these neuroscientists say is 90% of the process. 90% of it is by hunch, by feeling, by instinct, by intuition. And these people might say, well, I have the intuition because I know the facts, but really it's an emotional decision. And so there was a study that's written about here by Catherine Caruso. This is from Harvard, but it's talking about how the brain makes decisions. I also like the fact that they illustrated this with an AI image. But in any event, a lot of neuroscientists will say they work in combination. Our thoughts and feelings, our logic and our emotions work together to make a decision. But really, what takes the lead, what follows, what really is the driver? And a lot of people do come down on the side of it's our feelings, it's a gut instinct. And so if you know that you have to get all your numbers right, that's your job. You have to make everything pencil out on your project. The finances have to work, the ROI. I'm not saying to ignore all that stuff. I'm saying do your homework, have that available. Just don't put it up front. Make sure you're appealing to their emotional needs. And so we're going to talk about, this is really exciting to me. We're going to talk about some projects today that are your projects. So I've completely changed the exercise. And so what we're going to do today for the exercise is you're going to pitch your own projects. So I'll show you what these are up front. You guys have supplied some projects, and I'm going to show you 6 of them. And for the exercise today, I'm going to give you a little advance warning so you can kind of begin to think about it if you're not familiar with these projects. But the person whose project this is, whose firm is working on this project, will be part of your group. But what I don't want that person to take over and say, oh, well, here's what the project is. Here's the idea. Here's what we think it is, blah, blah, blah. I want to make sure that person whose project it is able to communicate it to the rest of the group. So I want the reporter to be somebody whose project it's not. So we can make sure while you're out doing that exercise, that person can explain the project, can explain what it is, but I want to make sure it's received by somebody else. Because remember, what I'm saying is it has to be received, absorbed, and understood by a third party, somebody who didn't design it. So I don't want the designer to come back and explain everything to the rest of the group and say, well, this is our idea, because that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to get other people to understand it. So here are the projects that are going to be used in the exercise. So you'll see these come back at the end of the class when you do your exercise. But this is a sustainable building. It looks like a cool building. It's on a port. There's freight, there's people, there's community, there's all kinds of stakeholders involved in this project. So I want to know who's the hero, what is the feeling? Is the fact that it's sustainable enough, or the fact that it looks cool, or the fact that it looks aerodynamic, or what is it about this that's going to appeal to people emotionally? The next one is this piece of land that's going to be completely redeveloped. So you'll hear about it. You'll get more details in your group, but this house is going away, I understand, and there's going to be a new use for this real estate. And why? What is the community's reaction going to be? What about the people that border this area? What about the people that drive down that street? What do they think of the property? Are they going to be able to use what's going to be built here? Are they going to react to it in a positive or negative way? How do we engage that community? All those issues are super important to think about. Okay, there's a logistics park. And you might think a logistics park is just going to be used by corporations, by shippers, by big trucks, but it impacts the neighborhood. What about the trucks that are driving to this neighborhood? What about the people that live nearby? What about the people who had other ideas for how this property was going to be used? So this is another one of your team's projects. And what's great about this exercise, I think, is we're going to discover some things, and hopefully you'll discover during the exercise from your colleagues here, how does this come across to other people? What do they think about it? What is their first reaction to it? And then there's this other project in Colorado, which has multiple zoning requirements right now for mining, for commercial, for residential. And so the idea is, the proposal is to reconfigure this as a commercial tourism recreation area. So it's Colorado. So I don't know the elevation of this lot. Is it for winter sports? Is it for whitewater rafting? Is it for skiing? I don't know. But you'll learn about that because, again, you'll have somebody whose project this is, that's part of your group. We have specifically assigned the owners of these projects and dispersed them so that there's somebody who can answer any questions you have about this project. But I think a commercial tourism recreation project, it certainly appeals to me being in the tourism business, but I don't know the details of the project. And then there's a Norwegian Waffle House. Full disclosure, my mom's Norwegian, so I love this idea. But there was no imagery. So I went on Midjourney and I made an AI image of a Norwegian Waffle House. And so you can have this design for free. This is my suggestion for a Norwegian Waffle House. I have no idea if it looks anything like this, or if it's in the middle of a strip mall, or if it's in the middle of some other commercial development. But that certainly has a lot of story possibility. I mean, I don't know if there are trolls in this. I don't know. I will tell you that we did a Norway pavilion at Epcot, and Disney at the time is where I was working, wanted to use trolls and Vikings and do all the Norwegian folklore. And the government of Norway, they wanted their story to be, no, we're a major industrial power. They wanted it to be about oil derricks and things like that. So if you were ever at the Norway ride at Epcot, you can see there were both trolls and oil derricks. I don't think it was the most successful marriage of all time, but that just goes to show you like who your audience is and who's telling that story. Super important. That ride is gone now. It's now a frozen ride. But here's another Norwegian project. And then our friends from the concrete business, I don't have an image for that, but their story is how do we tell this story of sustainable concrete, which I think is super compelling story because obviously concrete has a big impact on our carbon footprint. We talked about carbon footprints last time. But if we can make that better, that makes the world a better place for everybody. So that's a great story. But how do we tell that emotionally so that resonates with each individual? So these are going to be the projects that you'll have in the exercise. And we'll give you a little bit more time today so that the people that are in those groups can explain their project and make sure when the reporter reports it back that they're capturing what's important about those projects. So I want to give you an example of this. There was a competition brief, and this is 100 years old, probably more than 100 years old. And the competition brief said, we want to make the most beautiful commercial building in the world. That was the goal of this project brief. I'll tell you what the building is. It's the Tribune Tower, which is in Chicago, and it still stands today. And in fact, it is one of the most beautiful commercial buildings in the world, in my opinion. But here's some of the contest entries. And I don't think any of these are the most beautiful office building in the world. You might disagree. You might think they're beautiful. But what's interesting is these are buildings that were beautiful to architects, not to people who would use the building. The building was owned by the Tribune newspaper, so it was newspaper people that were using the building. So most of the buildings, and as I said, this was 100 years ago, so I don't know exactly which year, but the very beginning of the 20th century. So the very beginning of the 20th century, if you think about office building, they were neoclassical. They had, Corinthian columns and all kinds of decoration. And that was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and modernism and the stripping of ornamentation from buildings. So to architects, these buildings were beautiful because they were stripped of ornamentation. The third one, especially, I think, is especially egregious because the designer decided to make it a giant column. And his inside joke was, it's a newspaper, get it? Newspapers are in columns. So I'm going to make a giant column. But that's something that he might get as a designer, or maybe a couple of people will get, but it doesn't translate into the user. A user doesn't come by that building and go, wow, that's really the most beautiful office building I've ever seen. So here's the building that won, and it's a beautiful building. So there on the left is the illustration. The second one is a model, and the building on the right is the winning building, which still stands today by the architects Howells and Hood. It was built in 1925. So yes, 100 years ago. So that building by architects, they might say, well, it's old-fashioned. It's got all these historical details and it's nothing innovative architecturally. And my answer is, so what? The brief said the most beautiful building. And that means to me, anybody walking by, right? It doesn't mean to you, the architect, to you, Steve, or to you, Aaron, or David, or Hussein, or Jorge. It's not us. It's the person who's the pedestrian walking by. It's the office worker. And so this was a review. I don't know if it was in the Tribune, but it says the rest is for inspiration, a factor, be assured, essential to the men and women and writers and the handicraftsmen, the boys and girls, the journalists alike at the Tribune. They're in the printing press that thunders below them all night long. And it talks about the users of the building and how they appreciated this machine. Okay, so again, why do people go to theme parks? Because they want to make memories with people that they love. So it's about those people. It's not about us, the designers, us, the developers, us, the people who are financing it, building it, designing it. Why do the people love it? And I'm using the word love, which is about as powerful an emotional word as you can use. And so a beautiful building really responds to that same core deep inside of us. And I mentioned a book last week about architecture that the journalist wrote, where he was not an architect, but he talked about his love for architecture. The architecture of happiness, in fact, is what he called the book. Again, these things are irrelevant: ROI, IR, market analysis, et cetera, et cetera. I mentioned those previously, that those are irrelevant in what we're going to be talking about in our exercise. So during the exercise today, I don't want you to talk about any of these things, the return on investment. Again, these things are important. If they can be in your pitch deck that you're pitching, just don't lead with them. They might even be in a separate document that you leave behind to say, look, all our finances work out. Again, it depends on your audience. If your audience is a finance guy, maybe this is all that he or she wants to talk about, but you want to talk about as much as possible that the guest or the user is the hero of the story. And what's interesting to me is these quotes. So this is from Steve Clayton from Microsoft. He's like, it's very easy to slip into celebrating yourself and celebrating your product, but it's a lot more rewarding to find stories of where those products actually have an impact. And his title is Chief Storyteller from Microsoft. I mean, who knew that Microsoft had a senior executive whose title was Chief Storyteller? But this just goes to show, I mean, it's super important, certainly in theme parks and in design, and probably the work that we all do in this group, but even people who aren't designers. I mean, Microsoft designs software, certainly they design in another way, but they don't design these 3D objects that people are going to interact with and have a reaction to, whether they're the most beautiful building in the world. But yet Microsoft sees the value of this idea of storytelling, and they have its chief storytelling officer. So in the Harvard Business Review, there was an article, I think it was several months ago now, but it was called Storytelling That Drives Bold Change. And the bottom line of this article was understand deeply, explain simply. So all the things I'm talking about, you don't need to put them all in your pitch and say the conflict is this, the setting is this, the character is this, but you have to understand all that so that you know, well, if you're, say you're the developer of that Tribune Tower and the architect comes by and gives you this whole song and dance about how, oh, this is the dawning of modernism, we're going to make this building and it's going to be great. And then you'll be able to understand simply like, well, guess what? It's not beautiful. That's all that we were asked to do. It's not beautiful. That's our assignment. And they might say, well, it's beautiful in its simplicity of design. And it's like, it's beautiful to you. Go ask your mother. Go ask your cousin who has no business background or architectural background and ask them which is the most beautiful of those drawings. And you know what they're going to say. They're going to say that pretty building that they built is going to be the winner. And so GE, who builds, I don't know what they build anymore. They used to make refrigerators and TVs, and what do they make now? Rockets? I don't even know what they make. But they have a chief storyteller. I mean, I didn't know that. But this person, Yari Bovolino, says as a storyteller, we must find a purpose, a subject. We must find an audience, or we invent them, and then we compose. So GE thinks about the audience first. GE is thinking about the audience first. So if GE is thinking about the audience first, you better believe if you're making a building in which people are going to live out the key moments of their lives, a hospital, a home, an office building, you certainly have an obligation to be a storyteller. All right, so that's the first chunk of what I want to talk about today. Are there any questions regarding any of this?
I'm not seeing any immediate questions, but feel free to unmute anyone.
Okay. All right, then we shall proceed. Okay, so I have 10 questions. Now, these are 10 questions that every creative leader, you guys certainly are included in that, should understand about your project. And feel free to write these down. My job, I tell everyone, is real simple. I ask you one of these 10 questions. Whatever your issue is, whatever your problem is, I'm just going to ask you one of these 10 questions. Like, what could be easier? And what I'm suggesting is, as a developer, this could be your job as well. And so, and sticking to my rule of fewer words, more pictures in your pitch deck. I don't have these questions written out. I just have pictures. So the first question is, what is it? What is this thing that I am making? And you're like, well, that's obvious. Of course, you're going to say what it is, but you will be surprised. Pay attention. Go into a pitch. Somebody's in there pitching something and they're like, oh, it's black and it's got pages in it and it's got this strap that where you can mark the page. And then I'm thinking, well, what is that? Is that your novel? Is that your diary? Does it have your deep dark secret? I want to know what's written in that thing. You're like, they don't tell you what it is. So first you say, I made a journal. It's a diary for all my deep dark secrets. And I'm not going to show you what they are, but I'm going to show you how this book is made. So like you have to set it up first. So I'm not the whole time thinking to myself, what are they talking about? So say upfront what is, because you spent so much time with it that you're like, you go, oh, of course everybody knows what this thing is, but your boss or your boss's boss or who's ever invited the meeting hasn't. And they don't know what the thing is that you're making. And the second key thing is, what is the story? And the story are all the things we've been talking about over the last couple of classes. So what is the story of this thing? This is a book, and it's my diary of the last year of my life here, and it's got all the key challenges that I have faced over the last year. That's the story of this thing I'm making. The story of this pen is it writes, and it's able to take my thoughts from my brain through my arm, and it can write. It's a pen. You have to tell me what the story is, okay? Who is the audience? That is critical. And I gave the example before of like, I can tell you all this story stuff, and I can tell sometimes, I mean, we're not perfect at reading audiences when somebody wants that information. If somebody has already bought into it, it's like your boss or whoever it is you're pitching to has heard the story 7 times. You don't need to reiterate it. Maybe there's somebody new in the room, but the boss doesn't have the time to do that. Maybe you can go talk to that person later. But be really aware of who's in the room, of the story of those poor French guys that were sitting all day looking at the Excel spreadsheets. I just knew they were bored to tears and they needed to lighten up the mood. So just be aware of who your audience is. That's where a lot of the mistakes happen, is not knowing who your audience is, what they have the patience for, what they are interested in, what they are wanting from you. So that's critical. And the emotion, what do they want to feel? What do you want them to feel? Do you want them to be happy? Do you want them to be scared? I mean, obviously in theme parks, it boils down to a very clear emotion. It's a thrill ride. It's a gentle boat ride that's for everybody. It's a ride that's based on characters that people love to laugh at or that make people happy, whatever it is. But you have to think about the feelings of whatever group you're talking to and whatever group of users that are going to be occupying the space that you're creating. How do you want them to feel? And, like I said, it can be a gas station. You want, they're called convenience stores because why are they called convenience stores? Because that's the emotion. People are in a hurry. They want their needs satisfied quickly. That's the mood they're in. They need convenience. What is it that they want? So it doesn't have to be a movie or a book or a theme park to tell this story and to connect with people emotionally. You're satisfying some need, or you wouldn't be building something. You are satisfying a need. What is it that is that need? And that need can usually come down to some emotional state. And who's doing what, right? So these 2 guys are welding. One of them is welding there at the bottom, one's at the top. The guy at the bottom is like, well, I thought you were going to weld all these things. And the other guy's like, well, why are you welding my part? That's where a lot of the conflict comes in. When I have seen team dynamics, frequently the issue is that either somebody's not doing the job you expected them to do, or else they're doing your job and you are pissed. You don't want them to do your job. So it's really important to clarify roles and responsibilities. So the next question is, what's next to it? What's behind it? What's in front of it? Because context matters. Obviously, the context, this looks like somebody maybe who held out for a long time and didn't want to sell their house, but just think about it. Everything you build is next to something else. Everything you build is in front of something, behind something. We'll share a parking lot with other users. What is the context of the thing that you're building? So if you're building a thing next to a use of a building that's incompatible, maybe you want to rethink that. You have to look broadly, like when you buy a piece of land and develop it. Well, the person who bought the piece of land next door, oh, they're building a strip club and I'm building a preschool. Maybe this isn't going to work out. I mean, that might be an extreme example, but you have to think about the context of the thing. Oh, they're going to tear that building down next year when I'm trying to do construction. Just what is it? Or just aesthetically, is it going to look well together? And then you have to think about, how do people interact with this thing that I'm doing? You know, every experience now has an app that interacts with it, you know, whether it's a restaurant you can order or make your reservations or whatever. How does somebody change that story? How does that story become collective because different people are using it, when multiple people are in the room, when it gets crowded, when it's empty, when it's after hours? Like, how do people continue their experience? I mean, we used to use this term virtuous cycle, which meant people would go on the website, they would learn about our theme parks. They could have games they could play ahead of time. They could plan their day in advance. They could pick their favorite characters. They could do all these things, make their food reservations, their hotel reservations, their ride reservation. And then when they got to the park, they would play out this thing that they've experienced. And then afterwards, they could upload their photos. We could give them tools to share their memory. So there's a virtuous cycle, because once they've shared, then they're more inclined to return, because now they've shared it and their friends are saying, oh, that looks like so much fun. I want to go to that place. I want to go with you next time. And so it becomes this virtuous cycle where the interactivity, because people are engaged in it, then they're more likely to participate in it. And remember what Mr. Phil said, people support what they themselves create. So if they have a hand in telling the story, maybe it's a branching story, or maybe you give them some control over something, but what is it? How are they interacting with this thing that you're making? Because they're going to interact with it some way, even if they're just walking in and using this space, there's some kind of interaction. And so there's always the question of who's in charge and who's making the final decision. So you have to really clarify the team structure and what the role of each team member is and who has authority. And so that you can say, well, I think the story is this, and this person thinks the story is that, and we disagree. Well, who's the decider? Who decides? Is it a group decision? Is it a leader's decision? Who makes that decision of all these story issues? And then time, how does it change over time? Like that gate, the crystal explosion example happened because it was the 15th anniversary of Universal Studios Japan. So there are milestone events that sometimes get commemorated. Sometimes there are holiday decorations. Sometimes the thing becomes obsolete. Say it's based on in our instance, might be based on a TV show or movie that all of a sudden falls out of public favor. It's not as popular anymore. So we want to refresh it. So we add content, we evolve the content. But even if you don't change it out or tear it down and put up something else, it's going to change, because once you leave, all of a sudden it's the owner of the space is going to take over. And they're all of a sudden going to paint it a different color. All of a sudden they're painting your building black, and you're like, no, it's not supposed to be black. But you have to just think about, how is it going to change? What can they do to change it? And then what you want to do is you want to engage that owner in the story as much as possible. So they're now on your side. They're like, oh, no, this is the story. This is why it's this color. This is why it looks this way. This is why it functions this way. You want to enlist as many people as possible in your storytelling, which is why we're doing this today in terms of our exercise, is because I want the person who created that project to enlist the team member and the other team members in that vision so that when you report it out, everybody's singing from the same songbook. And the most important question, and also the question you don't have to tell the answer to anybody but yourself, is why? Why are you doing this thing? Why have you devoted your time and effort and energy and emotions into the project? Why? Why are you doing it? Why is it important? I'm doing this because I'm from this city. I really want to get back to the city. I always thought they needed a Norwegian Waffle House. And I'm part Norwegian, and I'm doing this to honor my recently deceased mother because she loved waffles and she was Norwegian. You don't have to tell anybody that part, but that's your part. If you're saying, I'm just doing this because the best paycheck I could find at the time. I mean, that might be an okay reason, but at least be honest with yourself because you might be telling other people, you know what, I just really love Norwegian waffles. Maybe you don't love Norwegian waffles. Maybe you love the paycheck. But I just want you to be honest with yourself. So the story you're telling the self doesn't have to be that public facing story, but I want you to know the real reason. Okay. The real reason might end up becoming part of your public. You know, if you are Norwegian and you're making a Norwegian waffle house, that makes a better story. That makes it richer. It makes it more meaningful. It makes you more authentic. But you have to be authentic to yourself. Like if you're like, oh, I didn't really want to do this project, but I had nothing else going on and somebody asked me to help. Okay, I'll help, but I'm not really that into it. But I'm telling you, if that's really where your head's at, try to find somebody else on the team who can pitch it because that lack of investment, emotional investment, will be read by people. People can tell, I think. So these are the questions. What are you creating? And they'll be in the deck, so you don't have to write these down. Who is the audience? What is the story? What is the audience supposed to feel? What is it made out of? What is the material of the building? Is it sustainable concrete? Is it steel? Is it wood? What is the context? What's next to it? How does it change over time? How do the guests interact with it? Who's doing what? And why? So those are the questions. And so here's how the questions will manifest themselves in terms of a thing, a place, a theme park, a building at a port, a Norwegian waffle restaurant, a redeveloped site. I can't remember all your projects, but this is how it will manifest itself. So number one is the why. Is it a tourist destination? So if you're saying what it is, that's the first question. What is it? So you have to say, oh, this is a tourist destination. And then the next question, who's it for? It's for people from all ages across the world. Is it about being a global crossroads? Is it about being where it is? Number four, is this place exciting more than relaxing? What is the feeling? Just think about because when I say feelings and emotions, and I always use happiness or sadness or humor or whatever, but really is this a relaxing plaza? Do you want it to be occupied? Do you want it to be busy with people? Do you want it to be a traffic hub, a destination for people? Or do you want it to be a getaway? Maybe your idea of a great public space is one that isn't heavily populated because you need a reprieve in the city. You need a quiet destination. This is a place where people can go and take a phone call because this is a busy part of the city, whatever it is. Okay. Is it concrete and steel primarily? What is it? Is it in the city center? Does it have a special role in the holiday? So this is, when I said it can change over time, a lot of places in cities get decorated for the holidays. They become part of a Christmas market or they become part of whatever the experience or holiday is. Is this in a place where it's going to change? So know what's going to happen. Look at the calendar. What is this place going to look like for 2 out of 12 months of the year? Because that's not insignificant. So can anyone put their name up in lights? This is about interactivity. Can they participate in it? Is there a way for them to be identified as part of this experience? And who's doing this? Is it designed by multiple design firms, et cetera? And then again, the why. Do you personally find this inspiring? So please ask yourself that. So I use these questions to do something that I call the story funnel. Now, the story funnel comes about because I'll take these 10 questions and I will use them for anything. So say there's a restaurant and a theme park, and somebody calls somebody on my team and they say, we need new chairs in the restaurant. The chairs are worn out. We're going to replace them. It's been X number of years. It's time to replace the chairs. And so someone will say to me, Steve, they need new chairs. Just go to a catalog, go to a website, go to wherever, pick out a chair, send me the link, 10 minutes from now, and we'll order the chairs. And I will say, being a pain in the ass, it's not how it works. We got to go through the story funnel. Like, I got to know what the emotion is, who's the audience, what is it made out of, who's doing what, all these questions. And they're like, it is a freaking chair. Why do you just pick out a chair, Steve? I don't need to hear about your story and your all this other nonsense. Just pick out a chair. And I will say, really, any emotion will come from any chair. You're going to have the same emotional response to any chair. Really? The same feeling, whatever the chair is, you feel the same way. You're going to sit in those two chairs. You're going to tell me your emotion's going to be exactly the same, because I don't believe it. I don't think that. I think these two chairs have very strong emotional context, and you will feel very differently just looking at these chairs, or certainly sitting in these chairs. So I'm going to go through my story file. Don't worry, it won't take too long, but I'm going to do it. So here's how it works with the chair. So say somebody says, and here, this is a handy chart that I've included that you can use if you'd like to use the story funnel. So there are my 10 questions. The first question is, what is it? It's a chair. So the simple answer is, I give them a chair. Now, if I didn't go through the story funnel, then any chair and every chair is the right answer. Whatever chair I give them, I've given them a chair. I've completed their creative brief. Their brief only said they want a chair. There's your chair. But my answer is that's not enough. It is not going to be the best chair for their to solve their problem. So then I will ask, more detailed questions. Who's the audience? What kind of chair is it, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a Universal Studios chair. Okay, well, here's a Minion chair. Is that right? Is that the chair? Well, the restaurant is not a Minions restaurant. So no, it's not the right answer. So what is the story? Oh, it's an old Hollywood restaurant. Oh, Hollywood, old Hollywood. I pick a director's chair. That's old Hollywood. Well, who wants to sit in a restaurant and sit in a director's chair? It's not comfortable. It's too high. It's not the right chair, but it meets the brief. So the funnel is getting narrower and narrower as I ask each of these questions, and I'm getting to the correct answer. So who's the target? Now, in Japan, which is where I came up with this chart, it just so happens about 2/3 of the guests are single females for a variety of reasons, which we could talk about on a different day. But the Japanese economy results in the fact that 20-year-old women and women in their 20s have a lot of disposable income and go to theme parks with their friends. So I ask a group of these women and I say, what kind of chairs do you like? And they like chairs that are upholstered, that are curvilinear, that are graceful, that are traditionally feminine in some way. So I picked this beautiful Art Deco curved chair. Okay, so now I think my audience is going to like that. It's still a Universal Studios chair. It's still an old Hollywood chair. It still meets all of my previous questions. I don't throw any of those things out. I'm making it more specific. So then the question is, well, what's the emotional need? And you're like, well, I don't know what the emotional need is. Well, think about it. To sit in a chair, you have to feel safe. You have to feel secure. You have to feel comfortable. These are all what I would call emotions. These are how you feel when you sit in that chair. So when I look at my chair, I was like, well, they're not going to have those feelings because they're not going to feel stable because it doesn't have armrests. So I put armrests on the chair, but I have to maintain this Art Deco Hollywood chair that I've come to from my previous questions. So then I get to the idea of what is it made out of? And that raises all kinds of issues of safety and engineering. And so I look at my beautiful Art Deco armrest and it has that grill where little fingers could get easily trapped. So I can't do that. So now I pick something that evokes that Art Deco style, but it won't be dangerous to small children who are going to get their fingers caught in there. So you see my chair there still looks Art Deco. It still has armrests, but you can't get your fingers caught in there. So then I think of the context. Well, I have to go to the space. What color is the wallpaper? What color is the carpeting? What color is, and the chair has to be reproducible. So now I get a multi manufactured chair that is a different color. That is what you see there. Well, how do the guests interact? That's my next question. Remember, is interactivity. Well, I'm thinking about it. These chairs, are they dining? Are they waiting in the lobby? Are they having drinks? I think they're going to need a table because I go over there and there's a bunch of tables there and people are holding their drinks or they're putting their drinks in their lap or they're putting their drinks on the floor. So I might suggest a side table. Now, it wasn't in the brief. They didn't ask for it, but I might suggest it. I'll say, if you guys are going to use a table, here's a table I would suggest. I went to visit the space. Here is something I'm going to offer to you. And then how do you implement it? It has to get realistic. So maybe there's some value engineering. Maybe my chair was too expensive. Maybe you come up with a simpler chair or a chair that is already out there that is similar to the chair. And then I think, how will it change over time? Well, maybe this chair is too white in color and it's going to get stained. So maybe I pick a dark color. So when I think about change over time, it's not just holiday decorations. It's how's the chair going to hold up over time? So there's my chair. After all my questions, I have my chair. I look at it and it does look like an Art Deco chair. It looks like I can go in Hollywood. It's practical. It does all the things. And so then I would, send the link to the guy. Now that doesn't take too much time to do all that, but that's the thought process I will go through. And that's on a chair, but I'll do that for anything. It can be a theme park. It can be a ride. It can be a tree. It can be a chair. It all goes through the story funnel. And then the last question is why. And so the why question, again, that's your personal question. You look at that chair and you're like, do I like that chair? And then you might think, oh, maybe that chair's a little boring, or maybe I could have done better. In which case, maybe I'll go through the whole story funnel over again. But that's how I use the story funnel to really take those 10 questions using a basis in story and narrowing it down. So this is the idea of how these questions evolve and how this thing becomes practical. Are there any questions on that before I go to the next thing?
I'm looking for questions. Please feel free to unmute anyone.
Do you do that? Like, do you have your whole team basically do that, or you're kind of really driving that, or they kind of they're
What
very
I've
familiar
done,
with the story
yeah,
funnel?
yeah, no. Ideally both. I've distributed these, and when I came on this project and when I've come on other projects, I meet with every single creative person one-on-one, and I give them this story funnel sheet. Whether they adhere to it religiously or not, I don't know. I just want them to know it exists. My feeling is that a lot of designers just do this process intuitively. They know, well, I can't do that because fingers are going to get entrapped in that grill. They don't need, oh, that's question number 6, so therefore I have to do this in response to it. This is something that, and I will tell them this. I'm like, you probably already are doing all these things. I've just codified it in a way into these 10 questions, which then goes into the story funnel. But I don't think you can be a good designer if you don't do these things. So that's why I've written them down, because you have to think about what something is made of, or how somebody's going to feel about it, or how you're going to implement it, or how it's going to change over time. You just have to. And if you're a young designer, maybe you don't think about that. Or if you're not the designer, if you're the buyer, then maybe these things aren't as intuitive. But I think it's really important to share. And I'll tell you why, is because you have partners. You're going to always have partners who are going to think this is crazy and superfluous and nonsense. And why do you have to go through all this to pick out a freaking chair? But you do, even if in a split second, you can go through all these things, or you can make it an exercise that takes longer. And I'll give you an example that comes from my time in Japan. So they had built this cookie stand. It was a place where you could go buy cookies. So the guy comes to me, the guy who is running the cookie stand, sets up a meeting with me, and he comes in and he says, I need you to make a new sign. Your team has to design a sign. We need a new sign because we're not selling enough cookies. So I say to him, all right, let me explain how this works. Number one, I'm not making your sign, so you can stop thinking about that. But I'm going to tell you why now. First of all, let's focus on your cookies. Your cookies are 600 yen and they're not that good. That's, I think, your biggest problem. I think you should really focus on that. But he was a marketing guy. He wasn't a foods person. He hadn't talked to the chef. He hadn't made sure he had the best, most amazing cookies. So I said, but that's your issue. My issue is that you're coming in and telling me a solution. You're coming to a design studio with a solution. Your solution is a sign, which is going to solve your problem. I don't think a sign is going to solve your problems. And so I took him through the 10 steps. I was like, let's talk about your cookies. And so I said, the issue is that it doesn't connect enough with the experience. So it was a cookie that was based on an intellectual property that was Japanese, and we had the experience in the park. And I said, you're not extending that experience. You're just making it in the shape of that thing, but you're not allowing the guest to participate and extend their experience. But what if you made it a game? What if the cookie was part of an experience? What if there was a photo op where you were baking the cookie and you could have your picture taken with, some aspect of that and make a background? But, the point of this story is that I wanted to include him in this process so that he didn't think of design as just like, make me a sign. Because he literally came in and said, make me a sign. And he left saying, oh, well, we could do this, or maybe we could make an interactive display where the people could do this. And so I invited him into this process of the 10 steps, and he became engaged. And his cookie sales, he didn't get a sign, he got a photo op, and his cookie sales went up. So that's the bottom line.
Hutch has his hand up.
Hey, Steve, practically speaking, like when we're working on a project or to invest in a business or invest in, a building or something along those lines, we have a decision matrix, kind of like this, that we ask these questions, but they tend to be significantly more financial related. And it seems like this would be great to add before and maybe after it. But I guess my question is, how do you mesh and where do you put this in the creative versus the financial versus the architectural or the engineering part of it? Do you redo it multiple times? What's the practicality?
Well, I mean, some of these things can cost more. Some of these can save money. Like, how do you implement things? Like, oh, these are going to be mass produced. So I know I'm not going to make a bespoke, I'm not going to make 100 different chairs that are going to be handcrafted by artisans that I hire in Alaska with their chainsaws. I only use that example because we hired somebody to carve benches for our theme park with a chainsaw in Alaska, which I thought was awesome because we're doing a Viking village for How to Train Your Dragon. So we actually did that because it made sense for our story. But I'm saying if it doesn't make sense for your story, then of course you're not going to do that. And so I think that's what we have to focus on. People think design is expensive, and the more you talk about design, the more it's going to cost. And I think that's what I would hope to disabuse and say, I mean, that chair at the end, if you look at it compared to the chair in the beginning, it's really not that different. It's probably not any more expensive, but at least it satisfies that it scratches that emotional need. And I think that you have to integrate the conversation about money into the conversation about design, because remember what I said about Zaha Hadid, and she said, know what it is that you're trying to find out, because design is problem solving. And believe me, we have as much money as we spend, and it's obscene on theme parks, believe me, but every day we have things we can't do because we don't have sufficient money. And I always tell the team, if you don't have more ideas than money, you are not doing your job. You always have to have more ideas and solutions and things like that. But a lot of your ideas are going to be about saving money. And you can come up with these ideas together. And if you collaborate with that person with the wallet to instead of just saying, oh, you're 10% over, cut 10% out of everything. That is the absolute worst direction in the history of design directions, because you can't cut 10% out of everything. I'd rather cut 100% out of this one thing we decide is less important for our story and then keep 100% of everything else. So it's a matter of prioritizing. And so if you engage that person who's making those financial decisions in the story decision, then they're going to all of a sudden say, oh, but this Norwegian elves might actually do this. So now we can make everything smaller, which will be cheaper because we're saying it's for the Norwegian elves. And all of a sudden the story guy's like, oh, that'd be cool. There's tiny things. And the financial guy's like, yeah, that'll be cool because I don't have to spend money on making big things. So I think there's a way to engage people and work on these solutions together, ideally. Anything else?
Seeing no more hands or questions, Steve.
Okay. I just want to talk for a second about Ibuku. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but there's this architect. She is Canadian Indonesian. So she was born in Canada and lives in Indonesia, and her name is Laura Hardy. And the reason I'm bringing her up is because I don't know in this group if there are skeptics to what I'm saying, but there might be. But I just want you to know that when I'm talking about story, I don't mean literally. I mean, I know today I'm using the Norwegian elves ones because I just love that idea, but it doesn't have to be a literal story based on a book that's from an old folk tale, but it has to be a conceptual idea. And so what Alora Hardy does is she makes these amazing, beautiful houses, and she makes them in Bali, and they're made out of bamboo. Okay. And the story isn't like, oh, this is the story of Snow White, and there's 7 rooms for the 7 dwarves, and one of the rooms is happy, and one of them is bashful. It doesn't have to be literal like that. But what she does is she makes these buildings. They're all handmade. Okay. Every one of them is handmade. They're all made by material she finds right near the site. It's all bamboo, which is growing in abundance in Indonesia. They're all made by the community. So people there that are not trained architects or contractors or construction workers in any way, they make these buildings. They take shape as they're being made because that bamboo bends imperfectly. You can't say this is going to be a 30-degree radius because you don't know that until you wet the bamboo and you stretch it and you get it to take the shape that you want. The buildings are all sustainable. I mean, they're made from the material on the site. And if you abandon this building, the material just returns to the site because she doesn't import stuff. There's no nails in this building. It's all just wrapped with the local materials and the reeds from the bamboo. And to me, that's just such a beautiful story. But I give that to you as an example to say it's not a literal story. I mean, I guess you could say the characters of the story are their community, really, because these are community-based buildings. And the change, obviously, is she's changed it from this wild site to the site that has this beautiful house. And the conflict is, somebody needs housing, somebody needs whatever the building type is to fulfill their needs. But also, I'm just so taken with the buildings. They're just so gorgeous. Here's another one. And just they're all different. I mean, go look on her site and she talks about some of this stuff. And to me, it really is narrative architecture. I mean, okay, it's a seashell because Bali is an island, right? And so it does have some of those literal storytelling elements, but it's not like the Snow White ride. It's not scene A, scene B, scene C, the bad guy, the good guy, the blah, 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 blah. So I just want you to broaden the idea. Now that I've kind of laid this foundation of what I mean by story, I just wanted to kind of broaden your thinking so that you can see what I mean in terms of story. She thinks about all this stuff. She thinks about it in the same way I think that we're talking about it. And so she's just like, yeah, I want to involve the community. I want to make it sustainable. I want to use local materials. I want to do this. I want to do that. Like, she couldn't do this building in any other place than Bali. She's not going to build that building in Los Angeles or New York, right? So that's That's a story. That answers those 10 questions. So she has videos, she has all kinds of, there's beautiful pictures of her houses. So what I also want to say, so I'm kind of reinforcing my messages here because there's marketing stories and there's design stories. So she's not, I mean, she may market her stuff in this way, but she's really using it as the foundation. So Ibuku or Ibuku, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, is really kind of, I don't even know what that word is. I don't know if it's a real Indonesian word that has some deep philosophical meaning, or she just made it up, or it's her niece's name. I don't know how she named her firm that, but I just got the word from her firm. That's the name of her architectural firm. And her philosophy is that. And I just think it's so beautiful. Like you could use it, you could certainly market that. And she does kind of promote herself. She does videos and talks and things like that. But the difference to me in a marketing tagline, like it's all here, which is the horrible marketing tagline I use for that mall in New Jersey, is one just is the selling without the telling. Like there's no real story, or the story is shoehorned in after. And I gave you the list of those log lines for theme parks. There was like 20 of them. To be honest, some of those were developed after the park was built. Some of them were developed before the park was built, but I used the ones that were resonant that I thought would tell that story. Because believe me, I mean, I'm not denigrating marketing. Marketing people are really good at storytelling. I mean, that's their stock and trade. So they're good at capturing the essence of it. But it doesn't really do you any good if you're a real estate developer to market it after it's already built, because you've already built it. So I just really want you to realize that although it may sound like a marketing story, or it may even in fact be used as a marketing story, you have to think of it first. So it's used as a foundation for your design and as a tool for you to raise money. I mean, that's, I think the use of these stories is for you to communicate it to other people. Again, getting to our exercise today, that's why I wanted the person who originated the story to be able to tell it to the group, make sure it's understood by the person who reports it out, who can then tell us the story. And then the person who originated it can say, oh, that's exactly right. Or you didn't get it, or that's right, but you put a spin on it, or, oh, you thought of it in a little different way than we thought of it. Again, going back to this, understand deeply, explain simply, from the Harvard Business Review. And so that's what Ibuku to me is. She gets, I mean, she's living this. I mean, she moved to Bali. She's building these properties there. She's very entrenched with the local people. I mean, like, it's so much in her. I don't know her, but I mean, from what I see in her work, I think it just flows through her and into her work. And to me, that's just really great story building. It's exactly what I'm talking about without being too literal. So here's another quote from that Harvard Business Review article from Frances Fry and Anne Morris. This is from that article, Storytelling That Drives Bold Change. And that article, by the way, is not about design. It's about any company. But begin by reflecting on the why of what you do. What problems are you trying to solve? Look at that. There's two things that I've been saying over and over again, verified by the Harvard Business Review. So that's why I wanted to choose this quote, because the Harvard Business Review is really talking about the things I'm talking about, which are specific to design, but showing how you can even broaden them to any business, any endeavor, because you have to know what the problem is that you're trying to solve. As Zaha Hadid said first, okay? So here's two important things that you need to be: rigorous and optimistic. And this is again from that same article. According to Gallup, 15% of employees, this is in the United States, strongly agree their organization leadership makes them optimistic. Is that the saddest thing you ever heard? 15% of people that are employees strongly agree that their leadership makes them optimistic. I mean, that's pathetic. pathetic. I mean, how hard is it to be optimistic? I assume if you're spending every day, probably more than 40 hours, if you're the leader, because this is about leadership. So you're a CEO. You put everything on the line. If this is your own startup, you've invested everything. You started in your garage, all your money's in this thing. Or if you're hired into another company, but you're the leader, you're waking up every day. You are optimistic. You have to be optimistic in order to be engaged in that, but nobody knows it. So this idea about storytelling, and it goes back to the question of like, oh, is this just something you use, or is this something you share with everybody? Like, you have to be optimistic, and it has to become contagious. So if you're overt about it and rigorous, obviously you're rigorous about it because you're doing all the things you have to do, but people leave out the optimism. And why they do that, I don't know. It's a tragedy, right? And there's the quote from Mr. Phil. I have to give him credit. I found his last name. I haven't seen him in many decades, but he is still remembered by me. So we're going to do the exercise, but first, before we do that, I want to know if there are any questions.
I'm looking for questions. Feel free to unmute. These are great quotes.
Yes, Steve.
Yes.
So I'm just curious why you brought in the subject of optimism to what we are trying to.
What about it?
Yeah.
What
No,
I'm
I'm
sorry.
saying why you brought in the subject of optimism and
Yeah.
what we are trying to learn or discuss.
Well, first of all, these projects are hard to get financed. I know that. Real estate development, most projects are not going to get financed. Okay, so you have to be optimistic. I think that is something critical, and that will help you get through the day. But it's important because in sharing your passion, in sharing your storytelling, then you are more likely to get people engaged. And you know what they say, people don't quit companies, they quit bosses. And the reason I think they quit bosses is because the bosses are not optimistic, are not showing how what is happening today leads to a brighter future. And I think by going through those 10 questions, then people can understand what you're doing. So if that guy from the restaurant called me and said, hey, Steve, I need a new chair, just send me a link from a catalog. And I said, okay, sure. And I sent him a chair, and I went through my 10 questions, and I sent them the chair, and he didn't like the chair. He's like, no, I don't like that chair. Pick another chair. Well, he's not engaged in the process. But if I engage him and I explain all that to him, first of all, he's probably gonna be like, all right, whatever. That's a lot of stuff. But if I am optimistic, and like with the cookie guy, like I was like, let's sell more cookies. I'm all about it. Let's sell more cookies. Let's pick out a new chair. Let's make a new building. Let's make a Norwegian Waffle House. Let's rezone this property and make a recreational facility. Let's make that building on the port. Like, you have to get excited, because that excitement is the only thing that's going to carry you through this exercise, going to carry you through the project, and is going to get this thing built. I mean, I think that is the key things are why am I doing this? And that's the 10th question that you only ask yourself. And if the answer is, well, I really wanted to do that other thing, but nobody would give me the money, so I'm just doing this until something better comes along. That's not optimism. That's time for you to do something else. That's telling you to do something else. And so that was the subtext of question 10 is passion and optimism. And without passion and optimism, nothing else matters. Because this is your life. You only got so many seconds on this planet. And if you're not optimistic, if you don't care, optimism to me means you care about the outcome and you care how it impacts other people. And when I'm talking about these stories, I'm not what I don't want you to come away with this is, oh, Steve talked about stories and he makes theme parks. And so he has to go through all this stuff to make up theme parks, but doesn't really have anything to do with me. And, I'm making concrete and I don't know. I mean, I know the concrete people. I'm not picking you because I know you guys are really into this, but I'm just saying somebody else might say, well, I'm just making this apartment building and I'm going to make $1 million on it, whether or not Steve believes that it has a story or not. I'm telling you that I believe you will be more successful if you embrace the story and you are passionate about it. And your answer to why is because it will make people's lives better. And I want to make people's lives better. And I'm urging anyone within earshot to listen to my story because it's going to make their lives better. And isn't that what we all want? Isn't that the optimism I'm talking about? So that really is at the root of everything, because design, and that's why I always quote Zaha Hadid about knowing what it is that you're trying to find out, because design is problem solving. There's always a problem. There's not enough affordable housing. That's a real problem. That is a serious problem. People die from that. I mean, we're not messing around when we talk about the problem of affordable housing. When we talk about cities and the problem in cities, if we talk about even parkland, there's not enough open parkland. These are real problems that impact people's lives. And we, the people on this call, can solve some of those problems. To me, that's like the great opportunity for optimism. And I'm optimistic, and I want to share that with you guys to know that you're going to go out and evangelize and be optimistic. And suddenly you'll tell more people, they'll tell more people, and the world will become a better place. So that's why I talk about optimism.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah. I don't see any immediately. Hussein, thanks for a great question, Steve, for tying it all together. Why don't we do this, Steve? We'll send everyone on for a break, 5 minutes, so everyone can get an extra cup of coffee, take a stretch break, and then we'll come back. We're going to immediately move into your breakout group. So if I could ask everyone, we'll come back at 12, let's say 12:18 ET. Everyone come back onto camera, particularly those individuals who are the spokespersons for their projects, so we can launch our groups and get you busy in a media activity. So 12:18, everyone back. Hi, welcome back, everyone. So as promised, we're going to send you momentarily off into your breakout groups for a fun activity. But Steve, let me turn it over to you and ask if you would like to recap that exercise or lend some emphasis. I am posting the instructions in the chat now, as you previously showed.
Okay, yeah. I mean, the only thing I'll add is just to reinforce, we're going to try to include everything we've talked about over the previous couple of sessions. One, think about who the hero is, think about the emotion, think about it. I'm not asking you rigidly to put it in any sort of specific format in terms of a sentence or a paragraph, but do try to be brief because when you're using log lines and pitches, you want to be succinct so that your audience is able to process it quickly. And just talk amongst yourselves about the projects and all the different aspects of the project. And then again, I want a different person who has nothing to do with the project to be the one who's pitching it out, and practice pitching it out so you can pitch it to the person who created it and said, is that what you guys intended? Does that make sense? And then when you pitch it to the group, we'll talk about it in that way.
That sounds terrific. As a heads up to everyone, again, instructions are in the chat, and there's a link to the images that Steve showed just a little earlier this morning. We're going to give you about 25 minutes there, give or take, for this exercise to give you just a bit of a timestamp, and we will update you before we pull you back into the main room. And there is one group that is actually going to look at two projects if you can tackle them. We'll let you discuss amongst yourselves. And I would just add to Steve's note, if your reporter can also be someone who's not reported in prior classes, that would be ideal, just so we get as many voices before we close at the end of our session today.
And if you want, just to add one other thing, the game we played, the story builder game where you use taboo as a basis for a game, you can try that. Like if the building that's on the port, say, describe this, but don't use the word port, don't use wharf, don't use seaside, don't use cargo or whatever is really relevant, and see if you can think of other ways. And the idea of that was just to loosen you up and think about the human beings that are involved and impacted by your proposals or your projects.
Super. So if we're ready, Chris, thank you so much for doing all the work. And behind the scenes, we're going to unceremoniously move you into your breakouts. Have fun.